Great. Well, let's get started. Welcome, everybody. My name is Michelle Senecal de Fonseca, and I'm one of the directors here at WiTT. And on behalf of Audrey, Helen, Annette, and Yasmin, unfortunately, some of them are missing due to business travel and a family death. We would like to welcome you all here tonight. And we have a really large group on the Zoom as well. So it's a very well attended event, and I can understand why, because wow, generative AI, you cannot open up a newspaper, turn on the radio or whatever without hearing AI over the last 6 months. And there's good reason. And we have a super panel tonight. I'm just really delighted that we were able to get the quality of individuals who will be speaking with us this evening. Unfortunately, we do have one speaker who is going to be a little bit late. She is going to then join remotely. So we're kind of changing the lineup a little bit. So handle it, work with us. Let me quickly introduce our panel, starting from the far end. We've got Esra Kasapoglu. She's the Executive Director of AI and the Data Economy at Innovate UK. And she's also a member of the Innovation Advisory Group at the Financial Conduct Authority. One of the things you'll notice with almost all of these individuals, they are multidisciplined. They seem to have about 5 different jobs. Next to her is Shima Abbady. She is an AI and data lawyer here at Bird & Bird, who is our corporate sponsor for this evening. And she's also a PhD researcher at iHub at is it Radboud University? Is that how you pronounce it in the Netherlands?
Radboud, yes. Almost perfect.
I'll go with her. And the university does research in digitization and society. Next to me here is Valentina Pavel, and she is the senior researcher in data and AI law and policy at the Lovelace Institute. And then our 4th member is going to be Lara Suzuki. She is the associate professor of computer science at UCL, but she's also the technical director in the office of the CTO at Google. And it's her customer issue that she's having to join us a little bit late for. So with that, we were going to start with Lara talking a little bit about the technology, but I think we'll come back to that. I think what we'll do is perhaps start off with Esra, because one of the things that it's probably captured everybody's attention a little bit is the mere fact that, you know, it has become so pervasive, and how is industry doing it? So what I have asked for each one of our panelists is just to talk for about 5 minutes about a particular topic, and then we're going to have a group discussion, and then we'll open up for Q&A, and we will also take it from online as well. Okay, Esra, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for having me on the panel tonight. For those who do not know us, I'm part of Innovate UK, UK's National Innovation Agency, and part of UK Research and Innovation Group. It is constituent of 9 different organizations. Innovate is one of those 9, along with our sister research council organizations, and we are specifically focused on the industry and business side of innovation. And we predominantly provide funding and business support to those UK businesses and help them grow through development and commercialization of new products and services, supported by an outstanding, this is very important for us, supported by an outstanding innovation ecosystem and world-class research base. Because we think AI and data economy is a game sport, and without collaboration, without a thriving ecosystem, we are not going to get there as fast and together. So it's very important for us. The UK has a long, for those who do not know the market, and this is just taking the pulse of it a bit for you, UK has a long and long-standing exceptional history in AI, and we have a strong record in AI research and related disciplines in this country, like engineering, mathematics, and ethics. And in terms of AI startups, scale-ups, private investment, and research papers that we are producing within the UK, we sit in the top tier AI nations globally. On a global scale, we are investing into AI, and we are the 3rd country after China and US. It's very vibrant. ecosystem that we can see, but there's a big one major problem: adoption of AI across across the innovation ecosystem, as well as the UK, and how we can export it to outside of the UK. We are having a bit of a challenge currently. And it's also the reason why adoption is a problem, and it's uneven across sectors in the UK, because it then doesn't help us unlock the AI's full potential and really drive the growth in the UK economy. AI is also one of our strategic technology, one of the strategic technologies in the UK, and it's very important for our UK's international strategy. With our sister council organizations and as UKRI, we have been investing in a range of investments actually that connect a variety of programs across the whole UK, Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and England. And it is all about what we are currently seeing, and our focus is about removing those barriers to AI adoption and building continuously that thriving marketplace for AI. It's important that we see AI as economics, supply side and the demand side. On the supply side is the developers, on the demand side, the adopters, and the information asymmetry is actually a barrier that we are trying to address. And we currently, we have £7 billion of investment as UKRI, but most recently, as part of that, we announced a Bridge AI program, which involves 100 million of investment, UK government's investment, along with another 100 million in the foundational models that you can find on our website. And these are all designed to accelerate the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning in adoption-ready industries across the UK. And when we think about the industries, finance is great, legal is doing really well, but what about construction? What about transport? These are all very important in order to even out the adoption rate across the UK. One of our missions as part of this program, I'm going to just skip through some of the stuff, is reskilling and building capabilities in the UK and bringing together diverse and multifunctional, multidisciplinary and different thoughts and experiences across all the sectors, because we think, and internationally as well, because we think that it's one of the key differentiators in creating that sustainable success and growth. As I mentioned, it's a game sport, and if we don't bring different disciplines together, we are going to leave some groups out of the, this evolution, and that's we see as a kind of a danger. But we recognize that AI solutions currently we see in the UK are point solutions, and we need to really think about AI as a transformational technology. And if you think about electricity, we are in a moment where we moved from candles to electricity. Some houses have electricity, some houses have candles, and we are trying to see how we can create that infrastructure, as well as, bringing all those houses connected to the main switch so that everybody can benefit from that. And we think that it has to become a tool that everybody uses so that we can power the future of the UK, like electricity, like the industrial revolution we had in this country in the 20th century. We also recognize that standards and policies are needed to be worked on before AI really becomes that transformational technology and create that effect. But in the meantime, there are great opportunities. There are already proven AI technologies and AI solutions that we can really find in everyday day-to-day use. And some of these are they are for greater purpose, and they can help optimize us resource allocation. Look at NHS, we can do better things with the fewer resources we currently have. And it can also help contribute to improvements in quality of life for all segments of society. society, such as predictive healthcare, adaptive education, and assisted living, because we have an aging population that we really need to address quickly. It's also important that we proactively consider and address the fast changing universe of privacy and security risks and ethical pitfalls that AI technologies can expose us to. Some concluding thoughts from me, and this is my personal view, is that AI has the potential really to make things more equitable, safe, and secure for everyone. And we do not want to think that AI becomes an invention that drives wealth, income, and power to just a couple of places on the planet. Our purpose as part of UKRI and as part of all the activities that I'm engaged in is to make it a technology for everyone, for greater good, to use and benefit from. Thank you.
Thank you, Esra. I was curious by the term that you used, game sport. And in any sport, you need rules. And so Shima, as probably your area of focus, do you want to speak a little bit about where regulation is going? You've had a very busy month with the EU and everything else. To you.
Yes, thank you. If my voice gives in during the middle of this presentation, please just ignore and pretend like nothing's happening. I've been having a little bit of trouble. So I was asked to give a little bit of an overview of some of the main legal risks and some of the main legal framework that is involved with generative AI. This is a slide, I hope everybody can read it. I made an overview, which I thought was the most practical, is to divide things up into 4 main categories. So I think the first category, which might also be the most exciting one, or at least it's the most exciting one to me, but maybe I'm just weird, is the area of regulation. I think when it comes to regulation, there's a lot of different regulation that's at play here. Now, of course, many of you will have heard of the AI Act. It's supposed to be the first general legal framework for regulation for artificial intelligence, not just generative AI, but artificial intelligence more generally, mostly high risk or deemed to be high-risk applications of artificial intelligence, but it might also include foundational models and generative AI systems. That's what the Parliament's coming up with now. So this is really a special act because it's the first of its kind. So the idea that the European Union has with implementing this act or developing this act is pretty similar to actually something that Esra just said. You said, you know, we're basically dealing with the era of now coming into electricity again. And that's actually similar now. It's the same wording, I think, that the European Commission used in 2017 already, where they said, you know, this is like electricity, this is like the steam engine. This is going to change everything. So we want to make sure that we have a very robust legal framework that is reflective of our values here in the European Union. And that's why they wanted to set the standard for the rest of the world, quite similar to how they tried to do this with GDPR. And I think they were pretty successful at it. They want to do this for AI as well. So this is an interesting area to watch. And you're right, Michelle, this is something there's been happening, a lot's been happening this last week. Last Thursday, the most important, the key committees of the Parliament voted on their proposal. And that means that it's now going to plenary, so the plenary vote for Parliament, and then there will be a trilogue between the Council and the Commission, and then we'll get a final text, hopefully somewhere in the beginning next year. This is the most important thing to watch. So then when it comes to regulation, there's also a regulation that's already existing that we should not forget about, because that regulation is also going to keep being in place. And I think one of the most important ones is the General Data Protection Regulation, so the GDPR, because when we're talking about AI, we're talking about data. And a lot of that data also includes personal data, both the training data, but also the data that we're using as input, you know, prompts, for example, for generative systems. And sometimes even in the output, there could be personal data. And the most important thing to remember here is that the GDPR will remain fully applicable. The new regulatory framework is not really going to change a whole lot about that. So that's really something to watch. And actually, it has been watched, because a lot of the data protection authorities became very skittish when ChatGPT came out. And for example, the Italian Garante, they even banned ChatGPT for a while in Italy. And now the EDPB is looking into it. So It's quite a thing. So important, keep it in mind, please. Now, then there's also cybersecurity. I think Esra also just said, security is a really big deal when it comes to AI. I think especially for generative AI systems, if you're integrating them into your own systems, be mindful, especially if you are a provider that falls within the scope of, for example, the NIS directive, cybersecurity regulation. You have to adhere to certain standards of cybersecurity. And very often what I've noticed with integrations, people tend to forget about the fact that, that could pose significant security risk as well. Then the second category, and I promise then the next categories are going to be a bit quicker, it's the category, I think, that is the general liability category. So contracting terms and conditions. If you're working with these systems, if you're purchasing, whether you're purchasing them or you're using them open source or via API or whatever, there will be terms and conditions applicable. Make sure that you know what's in those terms and conditions, because there could be very restrictive terms in there. Sometimes, it's even possible that the terms and conditions might say something along the lines of that the output that's generated by you, or even the input that you put into the system, is something that the provider can use for their own purposes. That might be something you want to watch. We all heard about the Samsung scandal, probably. So that was, or I don't want to call it a scandal, but it was quite a shock, I think, to many people to realize that if you're putting your confidential code into the system, then that might also be accessible to other parties, and that could, result in leaks that you don't want to use. So these kind of risks to look out for. Make sure that also your own contracts are in order when you're using these systems. And then third category, very important category, is the IP and trade secrets category. I already alluded to confidentiality, so I'm not going to repeat that. But when it comes to IP, there's huge discussion going on. Basically, the answers are unclear right now, because when it comes to the training, the input, and the output, there's, in all of these phases, there can be IP issues. Copyrighted materials can go in, copyrighted materials can come out. Perhaps, maybe they're protected, the outputs are protected by copyright, maybe they're not. Maybe they're protected by the copyright of somebody else if they resemble other works too much. So that's a very, very important area to watch. And then there's basically the other category of all the other stuff. And believe me, this is not exhaustive, but some things that I came up with are, the fact that we have this whole discussion about accuracy, bias, that could result in liability issues. That also brings me to, the fact that we have, in many jurisdictions in Europe, at least, we have quite an open-ended liability tort scheme. When I look at my own jurisdiction in the Netherlands, for example, you can basically claim for anything. You can call almost anything a tort. And good to watch here is the fact that the European Union is also working on an AI liability directive, which is intended to make it easier to claim for damages caused by the outputs of, when the outputs are used, outputs of AI systems are used. For example, if they are causing discrimination or whatever, but it could be anything. And then there's also things like competition, tax, if you're being dependent on these systems, make sure that you realize that if they are not available, something like some of these systems might not always be available if everybody's using them, which is happening nowadays. So too many things to list here, but I think these are the most important things, at least in my mind. So that's the very boring framework of law, but hopefully it's still, useful.
Usually tax is the most boring on that
that's
list.
true.
Okay.
I forgot about it at first, but then my tax colleagues told me, like, wait a minute. So here it is.
Super. Thank you, Shima. And I'd like to now welcome Lara Suzuki, who is on the Lara. Pleasure. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Can you guys hear me okay?
We can hear you perfectly.
Wonderful.
Great. We've been kicking off and talking a little bit about industry and regulation, but I think one of the things we're doing is we're just using the term AI rather loosely. And tonight we wanted to really talk about what is generative AI versus what's been happening since the 1950s. Could you maybe kick us off and give us a little bit of a 101 lesson and then give us your thoughts? We'd appreciate that.
Yes, of course. So first of all, apologies for not being in person. I had some last minute issues. I was not able to be with you guys today. So just as an introduction, so I work at Google as a CTO, as a technical director, and I'm also a professor of computer science at UCL, and I'm a visiting scientist at NASA JPL, working with the interplanetary internet and AI applied to space exploration. So when we think about like AI, what happens is like when we look into the past, um, we used to do a lot of rule-based systems. So if this, then that. So for instance, if 1 kilometer, if somebody's working at 1 kilometer per hour, then the person's walking, and then 2 kilometers. So it comes to a point that you have so many rules that is impossible for you to model everything. So it's easier for us to model the pattern and add a label to that pattern. So we can say, okay, this is the person walking, jogging, playing golf, all this. What happens is for us to work on a particular AI problem, we had to do a lot of little ML models. So if I give you an example, I want an AI to predict the best course of treatment for this cancer patient. I worked breast cancer and some other like diagnostic tools, but we cannot create just a single ML model to just say like, this is a treatment that person have to have. We have to first create an AI model that will say, is cancer present or not? Then it is a first ML problem. Then what is the extent of the cancer present? Then is a segmentation problem. Then what is the classification? Is this a benign cancer or not? Then is a classification problem. Then you can move into making a recommendation. So what happens is we ended up having all those different endpoints of AI using deep learning, because the deep learning technology, when we think about deep learning, is a way for us to learn from data different characteristics. So one part of the code of the machine learning will look at edges, the other one will look at fur, the other one will look at texture. So this is like the basic idea of creating a deep learning methodology. But we end up with all those endpoints. The idea of the foundation model is, what if I train a model with a vast amount of information about a topic or a generic one in a way that I can learn so much that I don't have to manage all those endpoints. So I can have one single model that can ask those questions, and those models could go and make predictions for us. This is how foundation models they started evolving. And with generative AI, the basic idea here, when we are using generative AI, it actually, everything started from large language models, because it always started with the idea that we humans, we communicate with language, right? It's so connected and intrinsic to us. So that's why the evolution of those foundation models started with language. So traditional models, like they need like domain specific models. For instance, if you need to create a question and answer model, you need to adopt a different particular modeling technique. So, or sentiment analysis, if your users are happy with your content of your website, for instance. So this is like the idea of creating those large language models that we pre-train on a large corpus of text, followed by a fine tuning on a specific task. So if you can have a generic foundation model, or you can have a foundation model applied for medicine. For instance, Google released MedPalm. There's other like technology companies releasing others. So you can fine tune for this to be grounded into a particular field. And the most exciting part of this is that you can actually also generate new information. You can make prediction. You can do a variety of tasks. And what becomes so interesting is that with those foundational models, especially generative AI, you can do multimodal AI prediction. And before you couldn't say like, I'm gonna give you a text, create an image based on that text. And today we have the power to do this. I want to give you an example of how that becomes so important. I worked in medicine before, and all the time we wanted to detect cancer, especially in younger women, because of the breast tissue is very dense. It's very rare condition, and ovarian cancer is the same. We don't have that amount of information available. So we would have to have a simulator of the breast tissue, go to a mammography equipment, make the image there, and then use all those images to try to train an AI model. With generative AI, what we can do is to ask AI, simulate the tissue of a 24 years old girl with this kind of like a tumor, and create some samples of images for me so I can train my AI model. So there's a lot of like particular things that generative AI is quite helpful beyond the entertainment. Because when we think about generative AI, we think more about the entertainment part. And we have to think more about like, what is going to help mankind? How I can make this to make, from a particular business, from a particular research, to be helpful for all of us. And so I hope I gave like an idea about why we needed to move into the foundational model idea and how it becomes so powerful now that we don't need to train all those AI models anymore with a lot of data, because we don't have a lot of like ML engineers available. There's a huge shortage in skills, like especially to work in AI, you have to have an extremely strong mathematical background. So we don't have much of that talent. So with these foundational models, we can allow everybody to try to get into this AI world without having the need to program their own AI model. I understand all the challenges that arises from engineering, but what we have to bear in mind is that we have to be bold and responsible at the same time. So all the time we created an engineering thing, so a new building, a new type of scaffolding, we had to have engineers to come and mitigate the issues and the challenges that those engineering projects they brought in, like different bridges, like with the wind, we had to have different engineers to create new techniques and new products for the bridges to be more stable. So all the time we're going to work like this as an evolution of engineering. So that's why it's so important, this kind of conversation, to allow us to gather insights on how helpful this technology is so that we can create better systems for mankind.
You very much. I think that's really helpful to sort of set the foundation for us in our discussion. And one of the things you're talking about is, you know, for the betterment of mankind, and it always comes down to the discussion of AI, you know, about ethics and how it's playing out in our society. And so I'd like to turn to Valentina, representing the Ada Lovelace Institute. And would you be able to take us through some of your thoughts?
Thank you, Michelle, and hello, everyone. My name is Valentina Pavel. I'm a senior researcher at the Ada Lovelace Institute, and I'll start with saying a little bit more about what we do, because it's absolutely great to have a civil society voice on the panel. Very much appreciated. So we bring a very different and potentially new perspective to this discussion, and as you can see, I came very well prepared. Don't worry, I won't go through all of this, but I'll have my notes at hand just in case I wander off, and make sure I get all the good messages through. So the Ada Lovelace Institute is an independent research institute, and our mission is to ensure that data and AI work for people and society. And what that means for us is that the benefits, opportunities, and privileges generated by data and AI are justly and equitably experienced and distributed among people. We take a social, technical, evidence-based approach, and we use deliberative methods to convene and center diverse voices. Ada's research examines data and AI deployment, development, and impact to anticipate what are the large ethical questions we need to think about. And I also liked Esra's metaphor on AI being a team, like a team game sports. So thank you very much. Because in game sports, you also need referees, and you also need people governing over how the rules are applied, and how they are enforced. So this is in terms of parallels and analogies, this is where ethics comes in. Yeah, just to come back to Ada, we are quite a small team. We're only about 25 people, but we come from very different backgrounds. We have legal expertise, policy, technology, economics, philosophy, technical expertise, and a lot of public deliberation expertise throughout all our research directorates, which are emerging technology and industry practice, society justice and public services, data and AI law and policy. That under the AI, data and AI law and policy is where I do most of my work. And we work on a very broad range of topics. We produce this research in order to inform, challenge, and shape policy, regulation, and industry practice. We engage with various governments, regulatory, private, and public organizations. For example, in the UK, we have worked with the Information Commissioner's Office on the Citizens Biometrics Council in order to establish what the people think about biometric technologies and how biometric technologies are impacting their lives, for example, with live facial recognition questions. We've also engaged quite heavily with DCMS and DCIT and the Office for AI. We've contributed to numerous public consultations on the data protection bill, on the AI white paper, and we're regularly participating in evidence hearings with select committees. We also work with industry in order to observe and understand their practices. For example, one of our projects is looking into how public participation in commercial AI labs is performed. We want to understand what are the different public policy approaches that are employed by companies, what sort of barriers companies face in conducting public engagement meaningfully, what would best practices look, and what is the impact these projects have on companies and their participants. Other projects look at the culture and practice of data and AI research, for example, when it comes to research ethic committees. And we've run a series of workshops with members of both public and private AI and data science research institutions. We worked on developing an algorithmic impact assessment for data access in healthcare contexts. This was in collaboration with the NHS, and this assessment was then tested with industry. So there's a breadth of issues that we tackle, and a wide variety of methods that we employ. And let me just wrap this up with saying something that we're very enthusiastic about. We've announced a big partnership with the Alan Turing Institute and HRC under a program called Enabling a Responsible AI Ecosystem. And we're going to conduct a major new survey on public attitudes to AI and data-driven technologies. And I'm mentioning all this because it's important to include public voices in how regulation and policy and practice are shaped by both public and private organizations. And all the more when such as like Michelle highlighted, everything is happening very, very fast. And some of the trends that we're seeing is that we have a very short time frame between research to launch, and this has the risk of obscuring some of the ethical questions, and potentially different teams within developing AI products or systems might have competing interests. The technological team is probably very pressured to release the project as fast as possible. The trust and safety team or the responsible AI team is focused on questions on, okay, how are we going to deliver this technology in a safe way? How do we make sure that the risks and harms are addressed prior to launch? And how do we make sure this technology doesn't exacerbate harms to privacy and to society at large? And aside these different incentives inside teams. We're also noticing this trend of corporations reducing the number of staff in responsible AI teams, and this is a very worrying trend. Because when everyone is moving so fast, this has knock-on effects on ethics, and we need to have strong regulations and safeguards in place, especially when risks are not sufficiently understood today. And I don't have a slide, but if you can imagine 3 columns, risks can be placed in, for example, with issues in data, like how what sort of data was used, potentially personal information might have been employed. There are copyright issues, like Shima suggested, and bias and lack of representation. Then issues in training with environmental impact, with questions around the labor that was put into developing AI models, and we've seen news articles about how poorly paid some of the laborers that kind of cleaned and refined these models were paid. Shima also mentioned data leakage and privacy issues. And in the third bucket, we have issues around usage. And these are, let's say, more of the societal concerns around misinformation, disinformation, around the hallucinations or incorrectness of these models, manipulation, reinforcing stereotypes, labor concerns, toxicity, information hazards. So this is just like a really rough map of the risks and harms that are produced by these systems, and they are happening today. So we don't have the luxury of really contemplating around how to build these guardrails, and it's very worrying to see that from the industry side, there's more and more push for deregulation and for voluntary measures, voluntary certification schemes and things like that. So to wrap up, what we'd like to see with AI systems is more focus on testing, on sandboxes, on inviting regulators to step in early in the process, on independent audits and impact assessments done prior to when the technologies were used. And of course, just to highlight more public deliberation and engagement in developing the systems that really turn out to impact everybody's lives. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, as you can tell, this is a huge topic, many different angles that you can approach. I'm going to start off with one of them. You were talking about, having this open debate. It's going very fast. We need to have more discussion. Well, there's at least at last count about 30,000 people engineers, tech elite, academics who've signed this letter at the end of March calling for a 6-month moratorium for AI labs to not develop any further until at least beyond ChatGPT-4 platform, no more developments beyond that level. And we should then have a system of verification. So I'm going to ask Esra, there's 2 sides to this camp. I mean, first of all, is it desirable or even achievable? But why should we pause, Esra? So I know this may not be your personal opinion or not, but I'm just asking you to be devil's advocate.
Exactly.
And I'm going to ask Laura to come about and say, well, why should we move forward?
Exactly. No. In a spirit of good and healthy debate, I'll debate on the side of supporting the pause, right? I think so we talked about there's the need for verification protocols, safeguarding guardrails and legislation to be put in place in order to prevent the nefarious use of technologies and curb that misinformation and spreading. But actually, this is a great opportunity. Thank you very much for asking me. And I needed to do a little bit of homework as well on my side, just to get to the, real details. And the devil is in the detail. So just a few highlights from the letter. The letter doesn't call for a pause on all AI development. It's just for the pause on training of models larger than GPT-4 for 6 months. I don't know. Again, we are humans. We decided arbitrarily 6 months is going to be enough, And acceleration of robust AI governance is also something that they ask in the letter. And this doesn't apply to anything that is already in commercially applied and deployed. So just to set the scene, ChatGPT is an AI chatbot, a web application that uses large language models. And I even checked what ChatGPT stands for. It says Generative Pre-trained Transformer. And I thought, yes, when I was a kid, I was watching these Transformer movies and I just said, yeah, okay, all right. So between ChatGPT and GPT-4, these are different versions of the large language models that they are both trained on vast amounts of data, internet data, so encyclopedia, Wikipedia, everything. So let me give you a sense of how the race to scale has accelerated. Between the very old idea of neural networks and when they started to, and when they really started to work, it took more than 80 years. It was very early on. It only took, though, less than 3 years between ChatGPT and ChatGPT-4. You can sense the phenomenal speed that we are moving at. And why it is important, if we can combine this capability with graph data, then AI won't be stoppable. That's what the worry is, because graph data will then help create the interlinking and the causal relationships between people, data, and everything else. Then it will also bring we discussed that, ownership, authorship, what is real and what is not. And it will be prone to manipulating these relationships. It will be, the AI will be able to mimic how the humans interpret the world and how our brains map and process the world around us. That is kind of worrying, credible worry. And then what will happen? This is the worry again, the concern, the harm that we need to think and bring the public consultation on is about then AI will be able to use this to these relationships as predictor of the future for influence, sentiment modeling, engagement optimization, and fraud. So there are a couple of reasons, and these are the reasons why the need for the post. But I can go on and on. The problem is, I think, that I would like to highlight. There's this technology is changing the way we communicate, we share, we live and work and do business. Yeah, the pace of technology, though, is at a level that cannot be absorbed by our brains and by our society. The challenge for individuals, for organizations, and for regulations is to adapt and evolve at a similar pace with the technology. I think we mentioned that before. That is the reason why we really need to bring everyone into this conversation. So we also mentioned about we touched upon the bias inherited into the data and production of the toxic content and misinformation spread at a scale that we might not be able to prevent. I think these are the real worries. And we need a referee. And who is going to be the referee? The governments, organizations, regulators. It's a big debate for our human mankind at the minute. So I would like to also give you an example. This large language model, the competency is on the language. It cannot do arithmetics, but then it will bring again the issue of digital content. If the machine you give it a prompt and it can return an answer, and this is a digital content, and we take it, transfer the content, but it conceivably and plausibly get things wrong. And we all need to become almost forensic scientists in order to check every single thing that we see, whether it's a correct, real thing or not, right? And before all of this, the digital content, there was only printed content, right? And whether the content was printed or not, it was dependent on the editors or the journalists to check and ethically approve if the content was to be printed or not, right? Watergate, for example, was verified from different sources before it was printed. So who's going to verify the facts and truthfulness of this created content?
Right, you're
That's the
starting to
problem.
switch over to the other side now. Lara, why should we continue on?
Hi, everyone. The first thing I want to clarify a little bit is like the Transformers name. I want to try to explain where that name comes from. So before, when we used to do AI, especially for language, because it has been quite interesting, especially from translation, a lot of like languages, for instance, if you want to speak in Portuguese, from English to Portuguese, like for instance, we have gender, like a chair is going to be female, a car is male. So, and most of the time we start like translating from English. So for us to transform to another language, we would have to obey those rules. Before, what we used to do AI, before the transformer architecture, we used to use like recurrent neural networks. But what that happened was spitting out translation word by word. So for instance, in many words, like for instance, the qualifier comes before, you know, the subject. So if you say pretty woman, in Portuguese, you would see woman pretty. So for us to obey those rules, to understand, okay, this comes before here in this language, there's a gender, this is the rule you have to obey. That is like where the Transformers kind of like name came from. It's like getting from one language to another one. That is how it emerged. What I think, like my opinion for this is that for AI is that we are in a very exciting time in development of artificial intelligence. And I think all companies doing AI should have their own ethical principles and responsible AI principles, not only like speaking, but actually technical ways for you to do this. And that's why it's quite important for us to have the conversation between the domain expert and the technologists. And in our view is that AI now more than ever is critical to delivering on this mission and commitment of creating benefit for mankind and analyzing data that is available and help us to be augmented. I don't think personally that AI is going to replace us. And I don't think AI is going to be ever sentient, because there's a lot of things that are intrinsic to the human mind. And I can tell you why. As a researcher, I'm talking about like a professor, a researcher. So if you are, do you guys know this Swindon roundabout, right? It's 7 or 6 roundabout, one inside another one. So think about you're inside of that roundabout. And then if you put like 1 million sensors inside a car to watch your face and all this and the face recognition and all this kind of stuff, I truly don't think we're going to be able to say, hey, that guy is suicidal or that guy is drunk, is not going to stop at that red sign. There's a lot of stuff that is intrinsic to the human mind, that malice, especially like that thing that we know when we look into somebody, you know, how many times we heard that, especially if we have a partner for long years, just for looking to the partner, we know what we're talking about. So those things that are very intrinsic to the human mind, I don't think we're going to ever be able to put that on a machine. And if we ever want to put that in a machine, it's going to be the conscience of whom. So what I think is AI is here for pattern recognition, to do stuff that is so repetitive that we humans can benefit from this. Although I mentioned before that we need to get AI right, which is why we have to innovate and be also responsible at the same time and deliver widely accessible benefits to people and society while mitigating its risks. It has to be a collective effort involving all tech companies, everybody, and others, including researchers, developers, users, government regulators, and citizens as well. That's why it's really good for us to democratize AI. And I would like to leave you guys with a thought. Marie Curie, at her time, everybody was so scared about radioactivity. She was persecuted, all that kind of stuff happened at her time. She said something that was really, really interesting. She said at her time that nothing in life is to be feared, it's only to be understood. Now it's time for us to learn more, so we might fear less. So that's why it's important for us to have those conversations, involve citizens and every single person to understand how AI works, how to detect something going wrong, because a lot of like fake news, they're created by us humans. And even when we have bias inside of our brain, we cannot use a mathematical calculation to make us spit out our internal bias. So that's why it's quite important for us to teach people, everybody, without a technical background or with a technical background, how to be ready for this. It was at the beginning of the internet. A lot of people, we had a huge digital divide. So we helped people to understand how to use the internet, how to be safe on the internet, how to understand how to navigate, how to browse. And I believe in AI, we are gonna have to move towards on the same direction, helping people to understand what is safe, what is unsafe, what is going to be helpful for us, what is not going to be helpful, and also make people to understand how they can also control and use those technologies to augment us. And that's what I mean about like innovating boldly and also responsibly, is also understanding how we're going to make those models available to people. So are we going to make this available for people creating stuff that's going to harm people? So it's about like creating those ethical principles and understand for each different industry, like healthcare, government, we're going to have specific requirements that we have like always to make sure technology is going to meet. And that's why it's so important for us to educate everybody.
Thank you. I know that we don't have a lot of time left for this evening. I'm going to ask one quick question for Shima and Valentina, and then I'll open it up to the floor and to the lines. Shima, you had mentioned about Samsung. For those of you who didn't know, they have barred their employees from using it because somebody loaded some code up to optimize it. And the company, of course, was concerned that, servers sitting outside of their country and, the loss of sensitive data. They also were writing up minutes of sensitive top secret meetings. And that was another issue. So new user cases with technology come out all the time. What are you advising, Shima and then Valentina? What are you advising companies on how to be able to start to get their arms around managing it responsibly when they think about either using it for processes or new products?
Thank you. So one of the things that we're doing a lot right now, and I think is also one of the most sensible things to start with, is to draft a policy for internal use of foundational models. You can build it on a lot of legal principles. So for example, looking into IP, you could say, don't use copyrighted materials to input into a system, for example, or make sure that if you use the output that the output is clearly marked as generated by AI or whatever. Don't input any prompts that are too specific, that might touch upon copyrighted materials. Think about GDPR, et cetera, And then there's also just a lot of common sense things, which I think have a lot more to do with making people aware of what these systems are. So I think, with the Samsung employees, they didn't really think about the fact that this is a system that also can regenerate what you put into it, and then it can come out one way or another. They didn't really think about that, or that maybe the operators, the providers of the systems will also have access to the data that you put into it. So those are more of common sense things that you can just put into a policy, and then I would say try to combine that with more training and awareness. And it's also always really good to help in these trainings to give a little bit of an overview of the legal risks and legal framework. So that's one of the things that we're doing, and I think that's probably the most sensible thing to start with.
I'd like to complement Shima's answer with how you look at this problem from the outside. So Shima's suggestions were perfect when you're inside a company and you're using these models, but when you're outside, the first thing you'd like to see, especially as a researcher, is access to that training data set, access to the parameters that were used for developing a certain model. And that is important for independent scrutiny and oversight. And without that, then you're not able to find out what are the implications, the risks, and the potential harms that come out of that. So this is very much from a scrutiny point of view, but there are also questions even at the higher order that you need to ask. For example, who are these models benefited? Like who is the actual who are the actual people that are going to be benefited or impacted by these models? What are the overarching rules and regulations, and who has power over these systems? I think both Esra and Shima referred to this analogy to turning the lights on. Okay, but who controls the switch is a question that's has a lot of implications when we have a look at who is actually designing and deploying these very large language models.
In doing some research on this over the last few years, two companies you might want to take a look at if this is a topic that you're responsible for within your own businesses is Intel and DeepMind, which is an affiliate of Google. They did some work internally and came up with some really good ideas in terms of, first thing is you need to set up an institutional review board within your business. And it's got to be made up of academics, people outside the business, inside engineers, social policy people, and a constant review weekly about the products and the procedures. And then a lot of what they're saying is get outside expertise and opinions. So when you are doing this, you're going to roll something, a new product out or whatnot, it's almost a double blind activity. You get an outside consultant who will then turn around and solicit input, but they don't know who the company they're giving input in, and you don't know who the consultants are. And it's trying to think about all of the different possible game scenarios, what would happen if it gets deployed. And these are just sort of some of the beginning things, but there's a lot. All right. Any questions from the audience? State your name first.
Thank you. This is Maria. Great panel. Very, very interesting. I have a question as a person who is not involved with artificial intelligence, which I am somehow. But my question would be how a person who is not involved could be defended from deep fakes and misinformation.
How do you protect yourself from deep fakes? Lara, is that something that you might have an opinion on?
Yes. So one thing that we often tell people about, especially deep fake and those types of things, is for you to use your browser to search for that information, whether that is really found across very different and credible endpoints like websites. So for instance, if you see a photo or a video of something doing something that sounds really strange, or some information that is very kind of out of the blue or is a novelty or something, to always double check, because it's one of the things that companies they're investing now is on factuality. That is if you are provided with something with a generated context or a summarization or something, where those sources they come. So one thing that we can use to protect this is educating one another and users, young people, and people who need help with digital literacy, to understand to identify if that is a credible source. If you see that in social media, to always be skeptical about it, and then to look into more kind of formal outlets for information. Those are kind of the first steps for us to go and to do this.
Can I ask something actually, maybe? Sure. So the AI Act will, with almost 99 or maybe even 100% certainty, is going to introduce the rule that deep fakes need to be labeled as such, so that if you find them, then they need to be labeled as deep fakes. Then there's a question, of course, of how that has to be done and whether that can be taken out, whether, you have to put it into the output itself, or it has to be visible somehow, or you can just write it in text, whatever. So there's still a question of that. but there will be something there. And then there's also the fact that, Photoshop exists as well, and misinformation has existed for as long as humankind has existed. So in a sense, this is not really a new issue, perhaps also. And legally, I think the current framework will, we have the tort framework, so it will probably be quite similar in terms of enforcement.
I had a conversation with ChatGPT yesterday, asking it how it would verify, for example, or how it would form a view about the allegations of polling machines being corrupt in say an election, like the issue that happened in the States. So it came back, and I kept pushing it, and it came back, and it talked about the graphs that you've discussed and various other things, and it would look for lots of different it would look for what experts and trusted sources thought. But then when you ask it what it's got access to, basically it can't get behind paywalls and things. So if the most trusted sources are things like a number of the trusted newspapers and various other things, I mean, then how do we form this trusted graph? I know that one of the things it doesn't do too bad a job of is to come back with balanced views. I mean, if you were to ask it what was the cause of the First World War or the Russian escalation, whatever, it makes an effort to be balanced. But nonetheless, if half the trusted sources are behind paywalls, then how do we deal with that?
Anybody want to take that one?
I can add something that I think it also comes from responsibility for people providing those tools to make sure that they balance also like trusted sources of information that makes the content available to everybody, that is not behind like paywalls. Because I totally understand this because sometimes I want to read some articles, not even created by generative AI, so I see, stocks or something happening and I click on this, is like I have to pay and I don't have access to that. So I think that is also what comes from a responsible side, is that thing about being bold and responsible. If the information that will help people to understand the factuality is behind paid walls, the user cannot really make a decision process. So I think that comes also from a responsible AI perspective of people working with generative AI.
So we're running a little bit over, but I do believe we have one question from online.
We do. Thank you, Michelle. Najila has asked, and I have something to add to her question, in fact. Some of the major LLMs have been trained with data scraped from the internet without any regard to the IPR of many of the creators concerned. What recourse do these creators have? If not anything now, what might this look like in the future? And I was planning to ask Shima about the Getty Images lawsuit and several of the other lawsuits that are now going through the courts on this exact subject.
Pearson's also had another one recently where they're going after people who, trained on their unauthorized models. Thoughts?
Yeah. So
Down west.
Yeah. First of all, I'm not an IP lawyer. So we have people at Bird & Bird who are much better equipped to answer this question, but I have studied, when it comes to generative AI, the IP field a bit. So in summary, there are cases currently going on about exactly this issue. So the training data containing copyrighted materials, artists stating, you've put all of our artworks into your system to train it, and now it is producing new things that you are claiming rights to. Maybe not copyrights, because we're not sure whether that's actually going to be copyright or not, but still you're benefiting from our materials. And also when it comes to the output side, there are also IP lawsuits going on stating that, similarly, there's IP rights that should accrue to the artist. Now, there's also perhaps an obligation going to be introduced that's proposed by Parliament for foundational models to provide a list with all of the materials that are copyrighted that they have trained on, which I'm not sure how they're going to do that, considering the fact that, there's so much data that they've been trained on. So maybe they could just say, well, we've trained on all the copyrighted materials in the world or something like that. And then there's also a obligation which might be conflicting to some extent, which is the obligation to make sure that the data you train on in the AI Act is appropriate for the use. So if there is a possibility of very extensive use, then you might say, well, you need to also train on a lot of different kinds of data. That also touches a little bit on the previous question, I think. So I think it will really have to crystallize out in practice, and there's going to be a lot of standards introduced and a lot of guidance, etc. So we'll have to see how it turns out. But there's a lot of questions.
Stay tuned, in other words. Great. I mean, I had so many more questions on safety and ethics and how AI is going to actually hinder gender equality in the coding world and trends in job displacement, regulation between Europe, United States, and China. But we may have to have another panel discussion later in the year because there's so many topics around this one. I hope you've enjoyed it. Can we give a great round of applause to our panel?